Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to Dave Listens to Hi-Fi. So, gratitude. Research shows that it makes you happier and healthier in your life. And, you know, when I'm talking about gratitude, it's the acknowledgement that there's good in the world. And the good is external to you. And when the good comes into your life, you recognize that and you're happy and thankful for it. You know, that's the gratitude I'm talking about. So I'm a grateful audiophile. I'm grateful that I know Thomas from Thomas and Stereo, and I'm grateful that Thomas has lent me his Galion Audio TS A75 amp, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So Thomas from Thomas and Stereo YouTube channel has created the Galion Audio brand. What Galion Audio is a collection of curated components that Thomas has sourced and voiced and brought to market based on his philosophies. As he explained to me, there's kind of three tenets to his offerings. He has the high-end products like his TS 120 integrated tube amp. He has some special products like his new Voyager LS35A type speaker, and he has his high-value products. That's a category that really interests me because I'd love getting a good deal on good sounding equipment. And the TS A75 amp is a product that falls into that high-value category. So what is the TS A75? It's a solid-state power amplifier, 2-channel, 75 watts per channel. And he's going to be offering it in 2 versions. This is basically the pre-production version of the one version, and then he's going to do a smoother version. So I've got the pre-production version of the amp here. Thomas sent me some pictures of the production amp. It's going to be about 17 inches wide, 6 inches high, and about 12 inches deep. The one I've got here is 6 inches wide and 12 inches deep, but only about 14 inches wide. So production versions will be a little bit wider, probably have a little bit better crosstalk figures or lower noise because of it, but internally the circuitry seems pretty much the same as what I've got. In terms of weight, the Galion TS A75 is heavier than the Rega Brio. I've got borrowed my brother's Rega Brio to use as a comparison, but when I compare it to my Ashley FTX 2000, the Galion is less heavy than that. My Ashley amp is 250 or 300 watts per channel into 8 ohms, so it's significantly heavier. The connections on the back, it's really nice. I like the layout on the back because all the connections are spread apart and they're easy to get to. The Rega and my Ashley, the speaker connections are really close together, and so I've got some locking banana plugs, and it's kind of tough to get in there and lock them when all the connections are close together. On the Galion Audio, the plugs are nice and spaced. It's easy to put everything in, nicely labeled, and it just makes for an easier way to connect and disconnect the amp, especially when you're swapping out speakers and stuff, more like I was doing during these tests. When you plug it into the wall, it draws, you know, 100 or 200 watts right off the bat. I'm charging up all the capacitors inside. At idle, it seems to use only about 30 watts, 35 watts. You know, there's big heat sinks still on the side. They barely get warm, and it really doesn't draw much power at all. Listening at low power and listening and when you're not using it just turned on, it just draws, you know, around 30 watts. My Ashley, that thing puts out a fair bit of heat when you're not using it, and it draws about 300 watts just at idle. So the Galion is using about 1/10 the power as my Ashley. So it's nice. I mean, it's not going to overheat your room, certainly, and it's not going to draw a lot of electricity and cost you very much money if you keep it on all the time. But if you do crack the cover, you'll see the build quality of it is very nice, and it's pretty impressive. The power supply, 2 big toroid transformers, one on top of the other, separated by a metal plate, going to two separate power supplies. There is, so along with those beefy toroids, you've got 60,000 microfarads of capacitance per channel, because it seems to have a bridge rectifier and some smoothing capacitors, one per channel to go along with the one transformer per channel. And so those are ELNA audio grade capacitors, 60,000 microfarads per channel. And then on the board, on the amplifier board, there's also four large ELNA capacitors, 40,000 microfarads of capacitance per channel. And then there's a bunch of other quality components in there. You see the little red WEMA capacitors. Those are supposed to be quite good. So it's got a collection of very good parts inside. And the build quality is nice, decent wiring, nice layout, very clean. This is a quality component. Casework is aluminum, big, like I said before, big big heat sinks on the side. Those heat sinks are a little overkill, it seems, because they don't even they don't get hot. They just barely get warm. So this thing is not going to cook its capacitors. This is not going to overheat. I think this is really built for the long term. Nothing super fancy, just understated, quality looking. You don't have to worry that too much money is being spent on the casework and not enough on the inside. There's certainly quality parts on the inside, so I think you're getting good value for your money. So if you're looking at the amp I have here, on the front it says Galion TS A100. I asked Thomas about that. Apparently the amp was supposed to be putting about 100 watts into 4 ohms, and that's where the A100 came from. Since it's rated 75 watts into 8 ohms, and the power supplies are as beefy as that, I would be very surprised if it only put out 100 watts into 4 ohms. Unfortunately, I have no way of measuring it myself, so we'll just have to take his word for it. So I brought it in here, I listened to it, compared it to my Ashley power amp, compared it to a borrowed Rega Brio. The Rega is 50 watts per channel, and it's an integrated power supply. I ran the output from my preamp into the Rega, and I adjusted the volume control to get the same gain. The way I like to do that is I put on a mono record, I play one amp on one channel, I play the integrated on the other channel, and I adjust the volume of the integrated till I get a center image, and then I know that the gain is the same between the two amps, and I leave the volume control at that level, and that's how I set it up. In terms of speaker pairing, I used my reference Carver Amazing Silver speakers, which are basically full range planar magnetic drivers with, they cross over at 150 Hertz to 3 open baffle 12-inch drivers per side. So those are those speakers that I mainly use, about 88 dB efficient. I also use Triangle Comet E, which are one of the original versions of the Comet speakers. And I have a pair of Noresco speakers, which use German isophone drivers from the 50s. Basically a full range oval paper cone driver with a paper cone tweeter crossed over with a single capacitor. So really simple speaker, about 97 dB efficient, and just want to have 3 different options to put it on to see how it played with different types of speakers. So all that being said, what does the Galion TS A75 actually sound like? When I first put this into my system, I listened to it for about an hour, and I had to message Thomas. He's like, oh, what do you think? I'm like, Thomas, this amp is high-end. What I noticed immediately was there's a sense of transparency and a sense of air and detail to the high-end that really sounds high-end. I had just come back from the Toronto Audio Fest, and there's a number of really high-buck systems, you know, the Rotel Michi on the Monitor Audio hyphen speakers, listening to the high-end Focals, the Gershman speakers as well, and there's a certain level of transparency and real air in the high-end that you only hear on high-end systems, on systems that are really tuned to sound good and use quality parts, and that's what this Galion is giving you. So one of the best aspects to the sound of the Galion was that air and that high-end detail that it brought to my speakers that I didn't get with my other amps, and it really was impressive. I mean, this showed you kind of the next level in sound. Listening to Second Home by the Sea by Genesis, There's a lot of synth. There's real instruments, real drums in there as well, guitars. And you know how our vision is tuned to see movement? You know, you can look at a static image and you're not necessarily going to pull out all the details. As soon as stuff starts moving around, that's the stuff that you notice. Same thing with our hearing, I find. You notice differences. And the way the Galion kind of separates the instruments and puts space around them and air and detail, you start picking out things because you notice, because they're all separated, and it makes it much easier to hear into the music. So in that Genesis track, there's a synth drum hi-hat, and then there's a real drum, a real cymbal playing. And even if they're playing at the same time on the Galion, you can pick out the two sounds individually really easily. I listened to it on the Rega, and it was more just like a splash, but on the Galion you could hear the two instruments separately, and you can even hear the space in between the cymbals, and it was really impressive. I mean, that's the kind of detail that's pulling out. It's subtle, but those are the things that really make this amp sound on the next level. I don't listen loud. I listen 60, maybe 70 dB. I listen usually late at night, and I found, in my experience so far with my Carver Amazings, the more powerful the amplifier, the better it sounds at low volumes. So I like to have high power amps just because they sound fuller and more natural at quiet volumes than smaller amplifiers do. Smaller amplifiers, I find you have to turn them up to really get the tone that I like. Bigger amplifiers, they work well at lower volumes. Thomas's amp, being only rated at 75 watts per channel, I wasn't sure how it was going to do. It sounded full, it sounded detailed, it sounded rich, even at those quiet volumes that I listened to. It didn't have the same low end as the Ashley. The Ashley seemed to have more punch and more weight and more heft really low down. The low end of the Galion was full and strong and detailed. Just it didn't have the same level of punch as my Ashley. But I do kind of equate it to listening to two different styles of speakers, like a sealed box and a ported box. My Ashley sounds more like ported speakers, where there's a bit of a punch and a weight to the low end, whereas Thomas's Galion sounded more like a sealed box, where it may be extended even deeper and it was more detailed if it didn't have that same punch. So there was definitely force to the low end and a certain level of detail that I didn't hear with my other amp. I listened to the Chalk Circle album, Mending Wall. This is from the mid-80s, I think 87 maybe. This was recorded using a Mitsubishi X80 digital open reel tape recorder with a Mitsubishi digital mixing system. So early digital, used a higher sampling rate than normal, I think around 50 kilohertz. Has a pretty unique sound to it, really clean, nicely detailed, really full sounding. I like it quite a bit. NIMBY, Not in My Backyard, that's an amazing song. And on the Ashley, it sounded full and forceful in the low end, and spacious. Vocals a little bit further back, nice spread out of the instruments. And then when I swapped in the Galion, it sounded like I had taken a sheet off the speakers, like more clarity, more depth to the sound stage, maybe less rumble in the bass, but you know, defined and really, really smooth. And I listened to Tortoise TNT with my reference amp. I was listening to it quite late at night. It was around 60 dB. It was quite quiet, but my reference amp just had a lot of weight to it, and really sounded full and satisfying. Nice open sound stage. Then when I swapped in the Galion, that's when my focus kind of went up a little bit, and you could hear more detail in the instruments. There's an interesting thing with TNT. They have multiple rhythms happening at the same time, and you can really more easily pick out the different rhythms listening with the Galion. It's that level of transparency and that level of detail that really allows you to hear a bit further into the music, and so it gives you further insight into what the artists are doing when it makes those instruments, kind of separates them more and gives you that clarity. So that was a good listen. I listened to the Alcone Zoot Sims Quintet on Mercury. This is a really nice recording. I like it, nice and transparent, very live sounding. I switched to the Triangle Comet E speakers, and I was comparing the Rega Brio to the Galion. So with the Rega, it sounded full and dynamic and punchy. You could really picture the instruments right in front of you playing nice and live. Then when I put in the Galion in place of the Rega Brio, a really dramatic difference. I had to go back and forth a couple times because I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. With the Rega amp in place, you could hear the music. It was right there. It was right in front of you. My triangles are not spread wide apart. They're a little bit closer in together, closer into each other. And when I put in the Galion, it sounded like, when I was listening with the Rega, it sounded like I was listening to live music just outside the room, listening through a doorway. It was kind of all there. It was nice and live and dynamic sounding, but it was like I was listening through a narrow doorway. When I put on the Galion amp, it sounded like I stepped into the room. It just made the soundstage wider. It added clarity and dynamics. It was like, it was as dramatic as listening to a band outside the room and then inside the same room. It was just like that. Really, on the Triangles, it showed what a big improvement in clarity and transparency you can hear using something like the Galion. And this is, I'm listening on my turntable, through my phono pre, through my Dodge 8 preamp. Dodge 8 preamp goes into either the Rega line level or the Galion. Now the Rega, because it's an integrated, there's an extra preamp section in there, so it's maybe not a complete fair comparison, but there was a dramatic difference when I went from one amp to the other. Now I was also listening to some Alice Coltrane, and this time I switched between the Ashley amp and the Galion on the Noresco isophone speakers. So these ones are very efficient, and on the Ashley it sounded good. On the Rega, I think that was the best pairing with those speakers, just because it toned it down a little bit. It wasn't super detailed, but very musical, very dynamic and warm and musical. When I put on the Galion on those isophone speakers, it was a bit too forward. Maybe Thomas's other smooth version would be better. Wasn't quite at the level of getting listening fatigue, but it wasn't fun to listen to. Only the Rega really gave a satisfying listen. System matching is important. Some stuff works well with others. It's important to get something in your own room and listen to it if you really want to have a good idea of how it's going to work in your specific setup. I also listened to some digital, streamed some Spotify through my DAC, and listened to the combinations of amps and speakers. Again, with the Rega on the isophones, that was a really nice combination. Listening to the Galion on the isophones, listening to Biba Doobie, her female vocals, a little too strident on that combination, but really matched well with both the Triangles and my Carvers. So having a convergent experience with that, whether digital or analog. So in the end, what did I think of it? I think the Galion TS A75 is a wonderful product. The parts quality and build quality is very good. I think for the projected price, Thomas was saying, I think around $1,500 US, be about 2,100 Canadian dollars at that point. I liked it enough that I would consider buying this as my reference amp. Just the clarity and the transparency it brought was really next level, and I'm gonna have trouble giving it back at this point. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you like what I'm doing. Give me a like if you like the video. Check out my Patreon, and I'll play a sound sample next. The Duchess album that I had made. We'll play it from vinyl and see what you think of the Galion amp for yourselves. Thanks. Take care. See you next time. You know, there are just so many airplanes going by right now. I have to keep stopping because there's airplanes just constantly going overhead.